Hi there. Welcome to the second part of the lesson on minimalism. We're going to continue to talk about Philip Glass and Steve Reich and also introduce John Adams, not the President of the United States, but the composer. Let's get started. So let's start up where we left off with Philip Glass. He has just had a big success with Einstein on the Beach, and then he wrote a trilogy of operas about people who transformed the thinking of their times through the power of ideas rather than through political force. The first of these is Satyagraha, which is about Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr. Akhenaten is about an Egyptian pharaoh and religious leader who chose to follow just one god rather than the many gods of Egypt. And lastly, The Voyage is written to commemorate the 500th anniversary of Columbus's discovery of America. His style has continued to evolve as he constantly is receiving commissions for new projects. He refers to his style as maximalism rather than minimalism, by the way. He's worked with many people. He premiered an opera on the life of Walt Disney in 2013. He wrote a cello concerto for Yo-Yo Ma in 2013, and so on. Many other orchestral works and chamber works and so on. In addition to this art music, his film scores have been very influential, starting with Koyaanisqatsi, which was an art film back in the early 80s, I think, and then continuing through Kundun and Dracula and The Truman Show, which some of you probably seen, and The Hours. His language, his compositional language introduced a new type of film scoring, and a lot of movie soundtracks today betray an influence of minimalism, and this is directly linked to Philip Glass and his film scores. Okay, let's pause the video there, and I want you to listen to an example from one of his trilogy of operas, and then listen to an example from one of his film scores, and then come back to the video. Now let's continue on with some more of Steve Reich's music. If you'll remember in the first lesson, he had introduced phasing and also some intricate rhythmic patterns that interlocked and additive and subtractive processes. In his later works, he combines this repetition with canons and very intricate counterpoint and adds more harmony and a slow harmonic rhythm in a style that has been referred to as post-minimalism. So we'll talk more about post-minimalism a little bit later. One of his greatest compositions, I would say, is Music for 18 Musicians. This combines all of these elements together. Electric Counterpoint was recorded by Pat Metheny, if you know the guitarist. There's some pieces that he wrote that reflect his Jewish heritage. First of these is Tehillim, which is a setting of some Jewish psalms and with voices singing in close canons. And then a very influential piece called Different Trains for String Quartet. You can listen to the first movement in the quiz that accompanies this, and it's about the train journeys that he took as a child between his separated parents who lived in New York and Los Angeles. And the interesting technique that he uses is he uses recorded speech and imitates the sound of that speech with the instruments. So sometimes we speak with a lilt or with a little gesture. He catches those gestures and repeats them with the musical instruments. The music of this piece chugs along like a train. It makes use of train whistle sounds, and they won a Grammy Award for Kronos Quartet's recording of this. In the second movement, there's a different feeling to it in the different train. This is about the trains that were used to transport Jews to concentration camps in Europe during World War II. Some people have called this piece the only adequate musical response to the Holocaust. And it's quite moving. Later in his career, he started to combine his music and the spoken dialogue that he developed with different trains and other pieces with the video art of his wife, Beryl Corot. Uh, so in these, you see people being interviewed. Um, for example, in the cave, there's recorded interviews of Jews and Christians and Muslims about a common ancestor that they had, Abraham. Um, the piece is named for the cave of Machpelah, where Abraham is said to be buried. Um, they also collaborated on Three Tales, which is about the Hindenburg disaster, the testing of nuclear weapons, and the cloning of Dolly the sheep. He's still very active as a composer. He received a Pulitzer Prize in 2009. He recently premiered WTC 911 with the Kronos Quartet. And not too long ago, he wrote a piece inspired by the music of Radiohead. So he continues to innovate. All right, so let's pause the video again here and listen to some of these pieces by Steve Reich and answer the question. Okay, lastly, I want to introduce you to the music of John Adams. Um, in his compositions, he combines minimalism with other styles, including what we would call, in a later lesson, neo-romanticism, because he has a love for late romantic music, and these things sometimes go together in his music. Uh, Overall, his style is generally referred to as post-minimalism. He uses the techniques and the processes of minimalism, like additive and subtractive processes and repetition of ideas, but it doesn't adopt the aesthetic of minimalism like we had with Lamont Young, which is very minimal and bare, and with lots of repetition, like in early Glass. Uh, Instead, these processes are moving a little faster. There's more things happening at once. The music is not as slow moving and static. Um, okay, so some of his early pieces are for piano. Phrygian Gates is a minimalist piece for the piano. The gates that he's referring to are these changes that the music goes through, these repetitive figures that are played on the piano. Shaker loops is similar for strings. Harmony Lyra is this symphonic poem that's sort of in the style of Mahler, or again this late romantic style. Short Ride in a Fast Machine is his most frequently performed pieces. It features ostinatos, repeating chords that creates this sense of moving forward. Um, then he wrote an opera called Nixon in China, which was very successful. It combines minimalism with Baroque opera. And it's about a historical event in the modern era about Nixon visiting China. More recently, On the Transmigration of Souls was written for 9/11. It's a choral piece commemorating that event, or not commemorating, but dealing with that event. And Dr. Atomic is about the um, development of the nuclear weapons. So he's still actively composing, and he has a very diverse style, as we've seen. We'll talk more about neo-romanticism in a later lesson, as I pointed out. Okay, well, that's the end of the video, but go back to the quiz and answer the last question and submit your answers. And I'll see you again later. Bye.